I thought I had the perfect life. My name is Sarah Chen, and for 8 years, I believed I was married to one of the most brilliant cardiac surgeons in the city. Dr. Marcus Williams was everything I had ever dreamed of in a husband: intelligent, successful, compassionate, and devoted to saving lives. As a pediatric nurse myself, I understood the demands of the medical profession, the long hours, the life and death decisions. I respected his dedication. Even when it meant he was rarely home. We met at Metropolitan General Hospital, where I worked in the pediatric ICU. Marcus would occasionally consult on cases involving children with complex cardiac conditions. The first time I saw him, he was explaining a delicate procedure to worried parents. His voice calm and reassuring, his hands steady as he drew diagrams on a whiteboard. Everything about him screamed competence and authority: the white coat, the confident stride, the way other doctors deferred to his opinions. It all painted the picture of a man who had earned his place at the top of his field. Our courtship was like something out of a medical drama. He would send me flowers with little notes about how my caring nature with sick children reminded him why he chose medicine. He spoke passionately about his work, describing complex surgeries with the kind of detail that only someone who had performed them could know. When he proposed, he did it in the hospital chapel, saying he wanted to start our marriage in a place dedicated to healing and hope. Our wedding was modest but elegant. Marcus insisted we keep it small, explaining that his family was scattered, and he preferred intimate gatherings. I didn't question it, I was so in love, and his colleagues from the hospital attended, sharing stories about his skill and dedication. Dr. Peterson, the chief of cardiology, gave a toast praising Marcus as one of the finest surgeons he'd ever worked with. Everything seemed perfect. The early years of our marriage were blissful. Marcus worked long hours, often being called in for emergency surgeries in the middle of the night. I understood the demands. I'd seen how cardiac surgery worked, the unpredictable nature of life, threatening cases. He would come home exhausted, scrubs sometimes still stained with the evidence of his life, saving work, and I would hold him as he decompressed from another day of holding human hearts in his hands. We lived comfortably in a beautiful home in the suburbs, drove luxury cars, and took vacations to exotic locations. Marcus explained that cardiac surgery was one of the highest paid specialties, and his success allowed us to enjoy the finer things in life. I never questioned our financial situation. Everything seemed legitimate, and he handled all our finances, while I focused on my own career and, eventually, on raising our daughter. Emma was born 5 years into our marriage, a perfect little girl with Marcus's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. Marcus was an attentive father when he was home, though his work schedule meant I handled most of the day-to-day childcare. He would often work weekends and holidays, explaining that heart attacks didn't take vacation days. I admired his dedication to his patients, even when it meant missed bedtime stories and lonely family dinners. Emma grew into a bright, energetic 6-year-old who adored her father. She would wait by the window for him to come home, running to hug him still wearing his scrubs. Marcus would lift her up and tell her stories about how Daddy helped fix people's hearts so they could go home to their own little girls. She was so proud of him, often telling her friends at school that her daddy was a superhero who saved lives. But then came that terrible Tuesday in October when everything I thought I knew about my life began to unravel. Emma had been fighting what seemed like a simple cold for a few days. As a pediatric nurse, I wasn't overly concerned. Kids get sick, and most childhood illnesses resolve on their own with rest and fluids. But on Tuesday morning, Emma's condition took a dramatic turn for the worse. She woke up with a high fever, difficulty breathing, and a rash spreading across her chest. My nursing instincts immediately kicked in, and I knew this wasn't just a cold anymore. I called Marcus at the hospital, explaining Emma's symptoms in clinical detail. Without hesitation, he told me he was coming home immediately to examine her personally. When Marcus arrived, he took one look at Emma and his face grew grave. He examined her with the thoroughness I expected from a physician, checking her pulse, listening to her chest, looking in her throat. After a few minutes, he turned to me with the confident authority I'd grown accustomed to over our 8 years together. "It is a severe bacterial infection," he said, pulling out his prescription pad. "She needs immediate antibiotic treatment. I am going to prescribe amoxicillin high dose." We need to get this infection under control before it spreads. Something felt wrong, though I couldn't put my finger on it at first. As a pediatric nurse with 12 years of experience, I had seen thousands of sick children. Emma's symptoms, the specific type of rash, the pattern of her breathing difficulties, her overall presentation, didn't quite match what I would expect to see with a typical bacterial infection requiring amoxicillin. But Marcus was a doctor, my husband, and the father of our child. He had years more medical training than I did, and he specialized in complex cases that required advanced expertise. I pushed down my nagging doubts and trusted his judgment. After all, he had never steered us wrong before, and his medical knowledge had always impressed me. We gave Emma the medication as prescribed, but instead of improving, her condition began to deteriorate rapidly. Her fever spiked higher, her breathing became more labored, and the rash spread to cover most of her torso. By evening, I was genuinely frightened. Something was very, very wrong. I called Marcus again, describing how Emma's symptoms had worsened. Despite the antibiotic treatment, he seemed genuinely concerned and suggested we increase the dosage, adding that sometimes severe infections required more aggressive treatment. But every instinct I had developed over my years as a pediatric nurse was screaming that we were on the wrong track entirely. That night, as I sat by Emma's bedside watching her struggle to breathe, I made a decision that would change our lives forever. I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus's diagnosis and treatment plan were incorrect, and my daughter's life might depend on getting a second opinion. Early the next morning, while Marcus was at the hospital, I bundled Emma into the car and drove to Metropolitan General's emergency department. Dr. Janet Rodriguez, one of the emergency physicians I'd worked with many times, took one look at Emma and immediately ordered a comprehensive workup. Blood tests, chest x-rays, throat cultures, everything that should have been done initially. Within hours, we had our answer, and it wasn't what Marcus had diagnosed at all. Sarah, Emma has viral croup with a secondary respiratory syncytial virus infection. Dr. Rodriguez explained, the rash is from a mild allergic reaction, probably to something environmental, but here is the concerning part. The antibiotic Marcus prescribed could have been dangerous given her actual condition. Amoxicillin can sometimes worsen certain viral infections and mask important symptoms. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. A cardiac surgeon of Marcus's caliber should have immediately recognized the signs of viral croup. It was a basic pediatric condition, something even first-year medical residents could diagnose. How could my husband, who claimed to be one of the city's top cardiac surgeons, have missed something so fundamental? Dr. Rodriguez continued. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and please don't take this the wrong way. Are you certain Marcus examined Emma properly? These symptoms are quite distinctive, and the treatment he prescribed, well, it suggests either a very rushed evaluation, or possibly a misunderstanding of pediatric presentations. That question haunted me as we treated Emma with the correct medications and watched her condition improve dramatically within hours. As I sat in that hospital room, pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed began falling into place. Small inconsistencies in Marcus's behavior over the years, medical terminology he sometimes used incorrectly, procedures he described in ways that didn't quite match what I knew from my own medical experience. When Emma was stable and resting comfortably, I made an excuse to Dr. Rodriguez about needing to check something in the hospital's physician directory. What I found there made my blood run cold. According to the official records, Dr. Marcus Williams was indeed listed as a cardiac surgeon at Metropolitan General Hospital, but when I looked more closely at his credentials, his medical school, his residency program, something felt off. I had been a nurse long enough to know how to access medical licensing databases. With trembling fingers, I pulled up the state medical board's online verification system and entered my husband's full name and the license number from his hospital ID badge, a number I had memorized. After seeing it hundreds of times over the years, the search returned no results. I tried different spellings, different combinations of his name, different license numbers. Nothing. It was as if Dr. Marcus Williams, cardiac surgeon extraordinaire, didn't exist in any official medical database. Panic began to set in, but I forced myself to think rationally. Maybe there was a simple explanation, a database error, a filing mistake. something bureaucratic that had nothing to do with Marcus's actual qualifications. I decided to dig deeper, calling the medical schools he claimed to have attended, the hospitals where he said he completed his residency. The first call was to Johns Hopkins, where Marcus claimed to have graduated summa cum laude. The registrar's office was polite but firm. They had no record of anyone named Marcus Williams graduating from their medical school in the year he specified. I tried variations of his name, thinking perhaps he had used his full name or a nickname, but still nothing. The second call was to Massachusetts General Hospital, where he claimed to have completed his cardiac surgery residency under Dr. Michael Davidson, a world-renowned cardiac surgeon. The residency coordinator checked their records going back 15 years, and found no Marcus Williams in their program. Furthermore, Dr. Davidson had retired 8 years earlier, and had never taken on a resident by that name. With each phone call, the horrifying truth became clearer. The man I had married, the father of my child, the person I had trusted with our family's most intimate secrets and medical decisions, was not who he claimed to be. Marcus Williams, cardiac surgeon, was a complete fabrication. But the most terrifying question remained: if Marcus wasn't a doctor, what was he? And how had he managed to fool not just me, but an entire hospital staff for so many years? I spent the next several days in a state of controlled panic, trying to maintain normalcy, while secretly investigating the man I thought I knew. I couldn't confront Marcus directly. Not yet, because I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. If he had been lying about being a doctor, what else had he been lying about? The hospital's Human Resources Department was my next stop. I claimed to be updating our family's insurance information, and needed to verify Marcus's employment details. What I learned was astounding. Marcus Williams was indeed employed by Metropolitan General Hospital, but not as a cardiac surgeon. He was listed as a medical equipment specialist in the cardiac surgery department, a position that involved maintaining and calibrating the complex machinery used in heart operations. Suddenly, so many things made sense. Marcus's detailed knowledge of cardiac procedures came from years of watching surgeries while maintaining the equipment. His familiarity with medical terminology came from being present during operations and pre-surgical discussions. His access to the hospital, his scrubs, his apparent authority, it all stemmed from his legitimate job, but he had been impersonating a surgeon rather than acknowledging his actual role. The financial picture became clearer too. Medical equipment specialists, while well paid, don't earn surgeon-level salaries. I realized that our comfortable lifestyle was likely funded by something else entirely, something I was afraid to discover. I began secretly monitoring our financial accounts, looking for clues about the source of our apparent wealth. What I found was more terrifying than I had imagined. Large, irregular deposits appeared in accounts I didn't know existed, always in cash. Never with any clear source, credit cards and names I didn't recognize, but somehow linked to our address, property, investments I had never heard of. It was as if Marcus had been living multiple financial lives, and I had been completely unaware of any of it. But the most chilling discovery came when I found a locked filing cabinet in Marcus's home office. Using skills I never thought I'd need, I managed to pick the simple lock and found folders full of documents that made my blood run cold. Fake medical diplomas with different names, false medical licenses from various states, and most horrifying of all, patient files that suggested Marcus had been providing illegal medical consultations outside the hospital. The patient files revealed the scope of Marcus's deception. He had been operating what appeared to be an underground medical practice, treating people who couldn't afford regular health care, or who were seeking treatments that legitimate doctors wouldn't provide. The files documented procedures that ranged from minor treatments to complex medical interventions, all performed by someone with no medical training whatsoever. Among the files, I found correspondence with other people involved in medical fraud, fake doctors, unlicensed practitioners, and what appeared to be an entire network of people impersonating medical professionals. It was a sophisticated operation that had been running for years, with Marcus as one of the key players. The most devastating discovery was a file labeled Family Insurance, which contained detailed notes about how to maintain his cover story with me and Emma. It included reminders about medical terminology to use, responses to give if I ever questioned his practices, and even contingency plans for what to do if his deception was ever discovered. Reading those notes felt like reading the manual for my own manipulation. Every conversation we'd ever had about his work, every story he'd told about saving lives, every moment of pride I'd felt about being married to a doctor, it had all been carefully scripted lies designed to maintain his cover while he pursued whatever his real agenda was. But the file that made my hands shake contained something even worse: treatment records for Emma. Marcus had been secretly medicating our daughter for months, giving her mild doses of various substances that kept her slightly unwell, creating opportunities for him to treat her and demonstrate his medical expertise to me. The antibiotic incident wasn't a misdiagnosis. It was part of a pattern of using our child as a prop in his elaborate deception. The realization that Marcus had been deliberately making Emma sick to maintain his cover story pushed me past the point of shock and into a cold, calculated fury. This man had not only deceived me about his identity and put countless strangers at risk with his fake medical practice, but he had been actively harming our daughter to protect his lies. I knew I had to act, but I also knew I had to be smart about it. Marcus was clearly dangerous, with an extensive network of criminal associates and a demonstrated willingness to harm innocent people, including his own child, to maintain his deception. I couldn't simply confront him and hope for the best. I needed a plan that would expose him completely while keeping Emma and me safe. My first step was to document everything I had discovered. I photographed every document in his filing cabinet, recorded videos of the fake diplomas and medical licenses, and created detailed notes about all the inconsistencies in his story that I had previously dismissed. I also made copies of all the financial records showing the mysterious income sources and the multiple identities he had been using. Next, I reached out to Detective Maria Santos, a police investigator I knew through my work at the hospital. Maria had handled several cases involving medical fraud, and I trusted her to approach this situation with the seriousness it deserved. When I showed her the evidence I had gathered, her expression grew grave. "Sarah, what you've uncovered here is much bigger than just one person impersonating a doctor," Maria said as she reviewed the documents. "This appears to be part of an organized medical fraud ring that has been operating for years. The fake credentials, the underground practice, the financial structure, this is sophisticated criminal enterprise." Maria explained that they would need to coordinate with multiple agencies, the medical board, the FBI's healthcare fraud division, and potentially international authorities, if the network extended beyond our state. But she also warned me that Marcus would likely become extremely dangerous once he realized his deception had been discovered. People who create elaborate false identities like this don't usually go quietly, she warned. "We need to plan this very carefully to ensure your safety and Emma's safety while we build an airtight case against him." The plan we developed was complex but necessary. I would continue acting normally around Marcus, while wearing a wire to record his conversations. The goal was to get him to admit to his medical fraud on tape, providing the clear evidence prosecutors would need to ensure a conviction. At the same time, a team of investigators would be building cases against his associates in the medical fraud network. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal when Marcus came home each day. He would still tell stories about his surgeries, still play the role of the dedicated cardiac surgeon, still act like the loving father to Emma, all while I knew he was a dangerous criminal who had been poisoning our daughter to maintain his cover. But Emma's health had improved dramatically since we stopped giving her Marcus's medications, and that gave me the strength to continue with the investigation. Every day she grew stronger and more energetic, proving that Marcus's treatments had been harming rather than helping her. The breakthrough came 3 weeks into the investigation, when Marcus received a call from one of his associates. While I was wearing the wire, the conversation revealed details about their illegal practice, including specific patients they were treating without proper medical credentials and the substantial fees they were charging for dangerous procedures. "Dr. Rodriguez is asking too many questions about that Chen case," Marcus said to the caller, not realizing I was recording every word. "We might need to move up our timeline and shut down the local operations sooner than planned. The wife is a nurse, she has been sniffing around, and I think she is getting suspicious." That conversation confirmed my worst fears. Marcus knew I was investigating him, and he was planning to disappear before I could expose his crimes, but it also provided the evidence Detective Santos needed to move forward with arrests before the entire network could escape. The final confrontation took place on a Friday evening in November. Marcus came home from work as usual, still wearing his scrubs, still playing his role as the dedicated surgeon. Emma was staying with my sister for the weekend, supposedly for a fun sleepover, but actually to keep her safe during the operation to arrest Marcus. Detective Santos and her team were positioned around our house, waiting for my signal. I had one last job to do: get Marcus to confess to his crimes on camera, providing the definitive proof that would ensure he could never harm another patient or family. I approached the conversation carefully, expressing concerns about Emma's previous illness and asking Marcus to explain his diagnostic process. At first he stuck to his usual confident explanations, but as I pressed for more specific medical details, he began to make mistakes that revealed his lack of actual medical knowledge. "Marcus, I've been thinking about Emma's case and something bothers me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The symptoms she presented with, are you certain they were consistent with a bacterial infection requiring amoxicillin?" His response was telling. Instead of providing a medical explanation, he became defensive and aggressive, accusing me of questioning his expertise, and suggesting that my nursing background wasn't sufficient to understand complex diagnoses. It was a deflection tactic, but it wasn't working anymore. "I called Johns Hopkins today," I said quietly. "They have no record of you ever attending medical school there." The change in Marcus's demeanor was instant and terrifying. The mask of the caring doctor and devoted husband dropped completely, revealing someone I had never seen before: cold, calculating, and genuinely dangerous. "You stupid bitch," he snarled, his voice filled with venom. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into. This is so much bigger than your pathetic little nurse brain could ever comprehend." But instead of frightening me, his confession gave me strength. This was no longer my husband speaking. This was a criminal who had been using our family as a cover for years of medical fraud. "Who are you?" I asked. "What is your real name?" Marcus laughed, a sound completely devoid of warmth. "My real name is David Kellerman, and I've been running medical scams for 15 years. You and your daughter were just convenient cover for my operation here." The devoted family man act made it so much easier to gain people's trust. He continued, seemingly unaware that every word was being recorded. "Do you know how much money people will pay for medical treatment when they're desperate? How easy it is to convince them you are a doctor when you know the right terminology and wear the right clothes? Your precious medical system is built on trust, and trust is incredibly easy to exploit." The most chilling revelation came next. Emma was never really sick. You know, those little supplements I gave her just kept her slightly unwell. Nothing dangerous, just enough to make my medical interventions seem impressive. It was actually quite clever, using my own daughter as a demonstration of my medical skills. That was the moment I gave the signal. Detective Santos and her team burst through the doors, weapons drawn, shouting for David to get on the ground. The man I had known as Marcus Williams, loving husband and skilled surgeon, was arrested for medical fraud, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud. The subsequent investigation revealed the full scope of the medical fraud network David had been part of. Dozens of fake doctors operating in multiple states, performing dangerous procedures on vulnerable patients, and generating millions of dollars in illegal income. The network had been responsible for numerous patient deaths and injuries over the years, all in the pursuit of easy money from people who trusted them with their lives. David's sentencing hearing was held 6 months later in a packed courtroom. I testified about the years of deception, the harm done to Emma, and the betrayal of trust that had defined our entire marriage. Other victims shared their stories: patients who had suffered complications from David's fake treatments, families who had lost loved ones to the network's medical malpractice. The judge showed no mercy. David Kellerman was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for medical fraud, child endangerment, and conspiracy. His associates received similar sentences, effectively dismantling the entire criminal network. As I watched David being led away in handcuffs, I felt not satisfaction but a profound sadness for the life I thought I had been living. Emma and I were safe, justice had been served, but we still had to rebuild our lives from the ruins of an 8-year lie. Emma, remarkably resilient as children often are, adjusted well to our new life. Her health improved dramatically once she was no longer being secretly medicated, and she began to thrive in ways I hadn't seen in years. We moved to a different city, where I found a position at a new hospital and Emma started at a new school. People often ask me how I survived the betrayal, how I found the strength to expose someone I loved and trusted. The answer is simple: Emma. The moment I realized that David was harming our daughter to maintain his deception, the choice became clear. No lie, no matter how elaborate or comfortable, is worth a child's safety. I also learned to trust my instincts again. As a nurse, I had years of medical training and experience, but I had been conditioned to defer to David's supposed expertise. The lesson I carry forward is that knowledge and intuition should never be dismissed in favor of false authority, no matter how convincing it appears. Today, Emma is a healthy, happy 8-year-old who knows her father was not who he pretended to be, but she also knows that we survived and thrived despite his deception. We talk about the importance of honesty, about how real love doesn't require lies or manipulation, and about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it is difficult. I still work as a pediatric nurse, but now I also speak to medical professionals about recognizing and reporting potential healthcare fraud. My experience taught me that even within our trusted medical system, there are people who will exploit that trust for personal gain. Vigilance and verification are not signs of distrust. They are necessary protections for patients and families. The investigation that followed David's arrest led to significant reforms in hospital credentialing processes and background checks for medical staff. The case became a landmark example of how organized medical fraud operates, and how institutions can better protect themselves and their patients from infiltration by criminals. Most importantly, I learned that survival after betrayal is not just possible, it can lead to a stronger, more authentic life. Emma and I built a new family based on truth, trust, and genuine love. We have friends who know our real story and accept us without judgment. We have a home filled with laughter instead of lies. Sometimes people ask if I ever suspected, if there were signs I should have recognized sooner. The truth is, there were many signs, but they were subtle and easily explained away by someone who wanted to believe in the life we had built together. David was skilled at his deception precisely because he understood how to exploit trust and love. The most important lesson I want to share is this: trust your instincts, especially when it comes to your children's safety. Medical professionals, teachers, caregivers, and anyone in a position of authority can make mistakes, or in rare cases, can be deliberately deceptive. Your job as a parent is not to blindly defer to authority, but to advocate for your child's well-being, even when it means asking difficult questions or seeking second opinions. Emma's recovery and our journey to rebuild our lives proved that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can lead to the most powerful transformations. We didn't just survive David's deception, we created a better life than the one built on his lies, and that, I believe, is the truest victory of all.